Hey guys, welcome to Fueled by Fire. I'm really excited to be starting this podcast, and I cannot wait to share all the amazing stories that I've had with some awesome athletes about their story of adversity, looking to get their inspiring story, and also some key mental actions and takeaways. If you're listening, that means you have downloaded the podcast, and I am forever grateful and really appreciate your support. And like I said, I really look forward to bringing you some key insights and stuff that's really going to help you in day-to-day life, your pursuit to be an athlete, or just trying to improve yourself. Fueled by Fire, it's a pretty interesting concept. I'm lucky enough to be affiliated with the Melbourne Storm, really creative and looking to sort of go to that next level. And they approached me about doing a podcast the end of 2018. And originally I was definitely interested and thought, how can I make this something that's my own and a little bit different and not necessarily just your go-to footy chat, which not only the Storm have heaps of, but for myself, it just wasn't really what I was interested in doing. So I wanted to look for a concept that I thought I could really leverage what I've been through. And that was one of the key things. My journey, which I'm going to take you through, has been through plenty of ups and downs. But how could I use that story to have a positive effect on other people? Now, within my day-to-day life in rugby league, I probably don't get as many opportunities, but through this podcast, I think it's a great platform, and that's sort of the vision I saw. So Fueled by Fire originally, I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could chat to some athletes that have generally a story of adversity that's ultimately fueled their success. And within that story, it's going to be a source of inspiration for you guys, but it's also going to look at their mindset and mental actions throughout and how they eventually got to where they are today. Throughout that, we're going to have some little episodes where I get to be quite candid, raw, honest about my own experiences and things I'm currently going through, as well as some high performance episodes with some really amazing people that will give you some insight into how they're helping some professional teams and just some amazing takeaways. So that's pretty much how we got started. And with the Fueled by Fire, I wanted to target athletes initially, but the name sort of came to me because basically the effect fire can have. Now, names can generally mean anything, but I really wanted a purpose, and fire can be ultimately something that can destroy you or it can fuel you. And I think that that's a pretty recurring theme throughout, especially when I've spoken to some of these athletes that they've made a decision and a choice to let their adversities fuel them to where they want to be. The concept has a little bit of an undertone of some of the quotes from Cus D'Amato, who's Mike Tyson's trainer, and I've got plenty of tattoos. As I sit here looking at myself now, I've got a watch that says party time, some bees on my knees, but one of the quotes I do have is a quote from Cus, and it says, "It started with a spark. I fed that spark, it became a flame. I fed that flame, it became a fire. I fed that fire, it became a roaring blaze." Meeting Mike Tyson at 14, that's basically an analogy for his journey that he's seen him rise to, world champion success. So I thought that would be a good little undertone and template for how I could run the podcast and sort of start with that spark of how people got to where they were going to be, how they started their journey, and then throughout going through their adversities, their achievements, and ultimately their roaring blaze, which we'd talk about their defining moment. And roaring blaze has also been the concept that we've used to interview those high performance people. So really exciting concept. And as I said, what I want to achieve is I want you guys to go through the journey with this athlete or individual, let it inspire you, and then really take away some of their mental actions that can help you. And I don't just want to pigeonhole this into rugby league or professional athletes. This is stuff that can have an effect on your day-to-day life, your routine, your own job, anything. And I believe we're in a great time where self-development's at the core for a lot of people, and I think this is going to have a profound impact. So, as I said, really grateful that you're listening, and I'm really excited to bring this to you. And I wanted to start with my own journey first of all, and I think that'll really lay the platform for the rest of the podcast. I want to be open, raw, and really vulnerable, and not only give you guys an insight into my story, but also an understanding of how I may have dealt with things along the way. And you'll see it's a bit of a roller coaster ride, but I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. So I'm going to take you guys back to where it all started. And for me, that's growing up in the eastern suburbs originally. I have a single parent, my mum. She's an amazing woman. I don't know my dad, and I've got a little brother named Ryan. we moved to Woolloomooloo early, and it would seem that my first recollection of sport and what I would be surrounded by was rugby league, and Mum really drove that. She was my first coach when I was 4 years old in under sixes, and she was a big Roosters fan, and I seemed to follow on from that. Mum's a Kiwi, so I guess it was bred into her early as well through her father. Rugby league, as I said, would be my main sport when I was younger, and Mum coached me and really drove me, and I got into the game early, but it would seem that I still think to this day that she loves rugby league more than I do. The main thing was, I remember going back, playing sport at a young age. Mum never drove, so she had a bit of an incident with a car when she was younger, and from there we just always travelled by public transport, which was pretty strange, and to think of that now is definitely strange. I can't remember the last time I caught a bus or a train, but back in those days, that was a norm. So Mum would bus and train me all over Sydney to go to any which game, whether that be school or on the weekends. And she pretty much essentially dedicated her life to me and what I was doing, which I'm really grateful for. But I played for the Paddington Tigers, so I was in the Roosters juniors, and we played in the Souths comp. I sort of went all through that in a young age, just swapping teams. I played for the Clovelly Crocodiles and Bondi United, and I guess as I started to grow up a little bit, getting into my early teens, I was chasing rugby league, rugby union, boxing, pretty much whatever sport I could get my hands on. It was a definite early love for anything competition-wise, and as I said, Mum would always lay the platform for that. When I was younger, going back to that public transport, I can think of when we were living in Woolloomooloo, it's definitely a different area to what it is now. I guess it was a little bit rough down near King's Cross. And I think it was in year 2. I was only about 7 years old, and I would walk up to the train station, catch a train through King's Cross, and then a bus to school. So I guess I developed some common sense and a bit of street smarts at an early age, and it probably set me up. But just that early development was really there, and I guess looking back, and it's always a hard thing to talk about because although we did come from humble beginnings and we lived in housing condition, Mum always made sure we had the best of the best, or I had always had what I needed, always sent me to good schools and really gave me a good platform to succeed and do whatever I wanted to do. But I do think that those times in my earlier days, living in those areas in the housing condition, did give me that bit of hunger that I needed. Nothing was going to come easy. And Mum would always reiterate that. And as cliche as it is, she really was a great example of hard work. I mean, she never had an easy life, but her work ethic, she was a nurse by trade and still willing on weekends to take me to my sport or help out with whatever junior club I was involved with. An unbelievable work ethic. And it's only in probably hindsight and reflection that you can look back and really appreciate your parents, or in my circumstances, my mum, and how hard they work and how much they're willing to do. But as I said, I think that instilled some pretty strong work ethic, and if I wanted something, I was going to have to go out and get it. I would move on to high school, and I went to St. Gregory's College in Campbelltown, which was a really different experience. I was living in Leichhardt at the time, which we'd moved to, and again, pretty long journey. I was a mix between a boarder and a day student. So I would take the train bus all the way to Campbelltown every day. So it usually meant that I was up at probably 5:30, 5:45, and I wasn't home until generally 6 o'clock. So it was a pretty big journey, especially, as you're just starting out high school. But I would mix between boarder and day student, and even at boarding school, it probably wasn't for me. A lot of the boys, I was the only one from the city, and a lot of the boys were from the country. So early on, it was a little bit of a struggle. But as I moved into that day student, I probably found school was a little bit better experience. And around that time, boxing was actually a really big sport for me and something I had a lot of passion for. Mum got me into Johnny Lewis's camp in Glebe, and I would remember those days that I was talking about, and I'd go to school all day, up early, and then get to the boxing gym for probably around that 6 o'clock mark. Wouldn't leave there till 8, and still to this day, it's some of the hardest training I've ever done. That was between about 12 to 15, and I'd leave there, get a lift home or catch the bus home, and Mum would meet me at the bottom of the hill with my big school backpack, carry it up there and feed me, and I was off to bed. So there was definitely a pattern of that routine, structure and competition that I had at an early age, and I guess I'm just trying to paint the picture for where some of my mindset and, I guess, for lack of a better word, probably grit comes from, because when you're 12, 13 and 14, the last thing you really want to be doing is going through that journey, going to school all day, and then trying to chase a sport that you want to get better at and try and compete in. So, it was instilled from an early age. But eventually, as you get to that 15, 16, 17 mark in your early teens, you pretty much have to decide on a sport. And being at a rugby league school at St. Greg's, that was predominantly what I did. Outside of that, I started to make teams. You've got your development squads at 13, 14, 15. And then you've got Harold Matthews at 16, which was probably my first experience of a somewhat professional environment with the Sydney Roosters. And that really lit the fire, because from then on, it was very clear that this was the sport I wanted to play. I was a huge Roosters fan. Rugby league is all I'd ever known. My mum loved it, and it seemed to be the path I was going to take. So from about 16, you make a definite decision that that's what you want to do. And I remember when I was thinking about going through this story, that I really wanted to touch on the fact that those younger years, when you're going through those teams, I probably placed a lot of emphasis on it. And I get a lot of messages from young kids now, or kids that are 13, 14, 15 in their teens, and they're chasing that rugby league dream, and they're so worried and putting so much pressure and emphasis on what they're trying to make. And to be honest, although I made some of those teams, it's really not the be-all and end-all. I could name countless players that have come down into those teams at a young age on contracts, or I guess had a better pathway because they're really talented, and who haven't gone on to experience NRL or a first grade system. So I just wanted to emphasize that if you are a younger guy and you are looking to try and crack it in rugby league or in the NRL, don't put too much pressure on yourself on an early age. Just keep developing yourself, keep improving, and mate, at the end of the day, the hardest worker in the room is always going to prevail. That's been highlighted on my story. Touching on that, I do remember one thing when I was in, I think I was under 18s or under 20s, and we were in a room, and I'm hoping some of you have this flash moment and can use this story as a bit of motivation. We're in a room, and it's pretty typical. You'll hear a lot of the rugby league boys that we speak with mention the same thing, I imagine, but you're in a room with the recruitment officers or the coaches of head clubs, and they sort of say to you, look, in reality, one or two of you are going to make it. And I know that conversation wasn't directed towards me, because at the end of the day, I wasn't contracted on big money. I wasn't brought down from, interstate or overseas. But I remember saying to myself, that's definitely going to be me. And I just had this huge self-belief. And I think that's really important to talk about now, because it's the shining light as I start to go through some of these adversities. Fast forward a little bit till I was 17. And before we touch on what happened, I want to make a point of the fact that we're about to go on a little bit of a roller coaster ride, but it seems to be that the highest highs are followed by the lowest lows. But that journey, that path is reoccurring. So you'll notice that as I start to go through these things, as I deal with adversity, for some reason I've made a choice to come out the other end with a positive mindset, and it's just been followed by some of the best moments. So the first key example in my life of that was when I was 17. I was at St. Gregory's College in Campbelltown, and I tore my ACL. Now, at the time, I sort of just stepped off my left really hard, and my knee just buckled, popped, and it was a lot of pain. But at the time, I hadn't had any major injuries bar, say, a rolled ankle. So I didn't really know what to expect. To be honest, I don't even think I knew what tearing an ACL was or meant. So after the game, I was pretty sore, had to do the usual trek home on the bus and train, and went home and told mum what was going on and how much pain I was in. And to her credit, straight away, she took me to a physio, and we got it assessed, and it didn't look good. Mum, early on, it's only in reflection again that I can do this, but it's amazing. Her thoughts and mindset was to take me straight away to the best knee surgeon that she knew. And at the time, that was Merv Cross, who's got an amazing reputation. And she took me straight to him for an assessment, and it had seen that I had done my ACL and I was facing, 6 to 8 months out and a knee reconstruction. Again, this really didn't have too much weight because it didn't mean a lot to me in the fact that I didn't really know what was what was ahead of me and what it was all going to mean. Also, the other fact is when you're in a situation like I am now, in a NRL team with timelines and things like that, for me to miss 6 to 8 months, what was I missing 6 to 8 months of? It was school footy. It wasn't too much, so it didn't really have too much of an effect in my mind. But Mum would take me to Merv, and we'd get the surgery done not too long after. And the great man he is, I don't know, Mum had to probably put on a few tears and really paint the picture of what was our life at the time. And she'd convinced Merv to put a lot of the surgery on Medicare, which would enable me to get the surgery done in a private hospital and all the rest of it. So I'm pretty lucky in that aspect that I was able to even A, get the surgery done by him, and B, have the care I had after. And coming out of that, I'd have a really good rehabilitation. I made sure that I did everything right, and I went to a really good physio who's now a great family friend and mentor for me, Elizabeth Steet, who's the current New South Wales Origin physio, and she was great throughout my rehab. But during that time, as it started, I sort of said to Mum, what are we going to do? And about 2 months in, I remember getting all my homework in a express postpack from St. Greg's College, which is a private school at the time, and I went through it and I said, Mum, there's no way I can do all this work. There's just absolutely no way. So I don't know how I got around it. Mum said, look, you can have the year off school, but you've got to make sure you're training and doing everything you can, and then you can go back to school the next year, which was an absolute miracle. But so I'd make some changes, and Mum sent me to a dietitian, the absolute saint that she is, who was Susie Burrell, and that was completely different for me. This was structure, routine around my eating. I'd go from having, cereal and Fruit Loops for breakfast to having 6 eggs, baked beans, toast, milk, sandwiches around the clock, and it would have a huge effect. Mum would send me up the road to the gym, and I'd crutch up there in my brace and my crutches in the first 6 weeks, and just got a general program from the guy at the gym. But at that stage, when you're first starting out weights and you're a novice lifter, everything has a huge effect. So I was going to the gym, working hard, on a really good diet, eating a lot of food. And this is probably the first moment where I go from that low to high. And I came back the next year for an SG ball trial in September and October, and I was 83 kilos. When I did my knee, I was 69 kilos. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the reality of the situation is, if I hadn't have torn my ACL, although I had good intentions and I wanted to be a rugby league player and I was generally healthy, I would not have made those changes. I wouldn't have gone to the gym as aggressively as I did, and I wouldn't have been put on the diet by Mum and tried to look at all these different alternatives. Me coming back at 83 kilos as a turning 18-year-old completely changed the way I played football. I was confident, I was powerful, and it changed my game from probably just an average player with good defense to a guy that would run the ball hard and, as I said, just full of confidence. And that would lead into me making the SG Ball Roosters team. So that's one of the first encounters I had with a major adversity, but making a decision of how I was going to deal with it, how I was going to get out of it, and how I was going to attack it. And then the result at the end was the reward of me not only progressing in my rugby league career, but making a complete life change and having a huge high at the end. And I don't really know how to explain that, but I know that if you are faced with adversity and you have that black and white choice, if you decide to not let it own you and rather fuel you, the reward at the other end is something great. And that's definitely something that's had a flow-on effect for me. I'd go to school the next year at Matraville Sports High. Again, I was lucky to go to another sports school, and it was full of talent. We had basically the whole Roosters and South SG ball team. We'd win every trophy you could think of, and have a good year. And I'd stick with the Roosters in the first year of under-20s, which was, I'm pretty sure it was the Toyota Cup at the time. And basically going into the Toyota Cup, you sign a little contract. I think it's $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. And at that time, you sort of struck into the limelight. You guys are treated like rock stars. We had all the gear. We were training with first grade, playing before first grade. So it's a lot different to how it was now. But at the end of the day, that under-20s Toyota Cup competition was an amazing platform. A lot of guys were able to transition to first grade. If you look back, I reckon at least 50% of all the clubs were debuting kids from that Toyota Cup competition. So I don't know why it's so different to the way it is now, but yeah, for me, in my second year in 2009, I would get that opportunity. I generally was playing well and thought, I was progressing pretty well at the Roosters. And I remember we were up at North Queensland and I had a pretty good game. And after that, Roosters that year weren't going too well. I think they were not last, but maybe second or third last. And Freddie came up to me, or Adrian Lamb, who was our coach at the time, who had a big influence on me being able to debut in first grade, came up to me and said, "Mate, I think this is the way we're going to go. It looks like you might get a chance." And then I remember being at the club at Roosters in Moore Park, and Freddie would come up to me. He was my favourite player, my idol growing up, and he'd sort of tell me, "Mate, we're going to debut you this week." And although you go through many great accolades and amazing moments throughout your career, I don't think anyone could tell you otherwise, but you can never top your debut. For some reason, it's just a reflection of all the hard work you've done to get to that point. Remember, I started playing when I was 4 years old. I'm now, turning 19, or I'm 19 years old. So there's 15 years of a journey that's taken me through all sorts of stuff, and finally gotten to that point where I'm actually going to realize my dream of making it as an NRL player. So it was an amazing experience. That whole week, the build-up, we played the Sharks, we got a win. I'd go on to play 2 or 3 more games. Overall, I was pretty happy with my performances. Probably the last one against the Warriors and my first taste of the big Manu Vatuvei. Wasn't my greatest game, but that'd be the last one for the year. But finished the year well, and towards the end of that year, I basically got to presentation night, and I still hadn't signed a contract, and I was thinking, what am I going to do here? And unfortunately, this was on the back of my debut night. We went out to a nightclub, and there were a few of us there, a couple of other first grade guys, which is well publicised, and we were sitting on a horseshoe table. Anyway, I was sitting on the end, and they were, mouthing off and a bit of back and forth with another group. And anyway, the group had come up to our table and approach us, and unfortunately, I had to be on the end of the table, which would sort of separate the two groups. And it got a bit out of hand, frustrations, and it got a little bit physical. So I was pushed. The guy punched me. Everyone would stand up. I'd push him away. And unfortunately, he'd knock over, I think it was his girlfriend or a female at the time. And it all sort of, the altercation come to a head. It wasn't too much drama, and everything was pulled away. We went upstairs and we sort of left the club. And as we were outside, the security guard runs out, absolutely frantic, carrying on, saying, "Mate, someone's hit a girl. What's going on?" And he's like, "Give us all your IDs." So, of course, we handed over our IDs, not thinking too much of it. And the next day, as my first experience of the Rugby League media, and they basically had said that a girl had been assaulted, and we'd be on the front of the paper. So we'd go to the police station the next day, and they'd take all sorts of photos. And it was really unfortunate because the end result of that, we went to court, and the old saying that any publicity is good publicity, well, this definitely put that to bed, because in this day and age, everything that you do sticks on Google. It'll sit there for years and years to come, and it'll just tarnish your reputation. And I think that's even more of an example in today's world, that you just really can't afford, if you are a public figure or have a profile, to do anything that's going to throw that reputation, because at the end of the day, it's just not worth it. Whether it was your fault or not, to be involved in something like that, if your name is tossed up, the internet's a very powerful thing. I'd be acquitted of all charges, so everything was dropped. I was not guilty, but as I said, the damage had been done, and I just feel like it was really unfortunate that I was in that situation and was involved in that, and it was definitely a tough time. But the powers that be at the Roosters and the recruitment officers decided that that was a reflection of my character, I guess, and I wasn't offered another contract. But for me, it was so hard to deal with, because when you play first grade at 18, 19, the perception is that you're definitely going to get another contract or another opportunity, another chance. So to get to the end of that season, after playing a couple of first grade games and generally good footy in the under-20s, and be told, "Oh, we're not really interested," left me in a really tough place, because at that stage, September, October, most teams have got their rosters sorted. So I was searching and doing everything I could to try and get a club, and my manager at the time, Sam Ayub, was hunting around, and there just didn't seem much to be popping up, I guess, in way of opportunity. And I remember there was a time at the Raiders where I pretty much spoke to Freddie, Brad Fittler, who was the coach, and at the Roosters who'd moved on, and I said, mate, I'm struggling. Like, I can't get a club. Like, is there anyone you can talk to? And he spoke to Dave Ferner at the Raiders, which is funny because I'd end up there. And Reece Robertson, who's a mate of mine now, the decision was, as it was made clear to me, myself and Reece were going for that position in the roster at the Raiders, and they went with Reece Robinson, who's gone on to be a great player, and as I said, good mate. But that's the way they went. And there you go, I was back in limbo, and I remember getting to November and thinking, I'm going to have to do preseason myself here. Like, what am I going to do? I'm not at a club, and I didn't believe it was all over. I obviously thought I'm going to get an opportunity, but I was still hunting out a slot in a system rather than going straight for a reserve grade team or something else like that. I thought, no, I'm still going to keep fighting hard here to try and get in a system in an NRL team. So I started my own preseason. Basically, I was living out west, and with my mate, we'd go to the gym in the day. Usually go down the park 3 or 4 times a week, do our skill stuff, try and get a little bit of fitness in. My main focus then was probably trying to put on a little bit of size. So I probably, in hindsight, spent too much time in the gym, but I was still ripping into my training and trying to be prepared as best as I could. And November would go by, December would go by. I'd get to the sort of towards the end of December, the end of preseason for all the NRL teams, and good old Freddie rang me again and he said, mate, I've got you a meeting with Matty Elliott, who was the coach of the Penrith Panthers at the time. And I was like, yeah, sweet. Like, let me know what you need. I'll go out and talk to him. So we arranged a meeting, and we went out there. I went out to Penrith Stadium and met Matty. He was a great guy. He seemed to be pretty open, pretty honest. And I remember a key moment where he had the whiteboard up in his office and basically had 12 names on magnet strips, just like we do here. And he said, these are the guys we've got in your position in the outside backs. You're at the bottom of this list. Play better than them and you'll get a crack here. It was as simple as that. And as I said, it's one of the main things I remember, one of the key moments. And mate, that was some motivation. I just thought, well, sweet. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So Matty had sent me back to the Windsor Wolves, which was the reserve grade team at the time. I'd start training there, play a couple of trials. Fitness was probably the most noticeable thing that I had lost, but it's something that would come back pretty quick. Randomly, we had a reserve grade game at Penrith Stadium before the Parramatta Eels trial, which is the last one, and Matty held me back from that after the game and said, mate, we're going to chuck you in, and I'd play 10 minutes of that, which looking back is pretty crazy, bit of a whirlwind, but I'd play 3 or 4 games in the reserve grade, and Penrith, I started the year well, and they decided to give me a full-time contract, which back then I think, part-timer I was on probably 25, 30 grand, so doing my best. But to be back in that NRL system as a full-time athlete, it was an amazing moment and a real testament to what I'd just achieved on my own. I look back at that as a pretty key moment and a story I'm really proud of. The fact that although I'd missed out on a contract and been left in the lurch pretty much after the Roosters, I went out and trained myself, prepared myself for an opportunity, and then executed when I got back over 3, 4, 5 games. And to get to that point where I was then signed with the Penrith Panthers, it's in reflection, it's an amazing story and something I'm really proud of. It would take till about round 17. Mickey Gordon, winger for the Penrith Panthers, would make the Blues Origin team, and I'd get my shot. And yeah, it was awesome. We played St. George Dragons and come out there, had a really strong game. Back then, I'd built my game on my ball carrying and taking opportunities. And that game would see me go from round 17 all the way to a minor semi-final, and hell of a run we had. And it was a pretty awesome experience, starting to feel like you belonged in first grade, but you also had a purpose. You were there. You felt comfortable and playing good footy. That was one of the big things. Penrith were going quite well at the time, but we'd go on a bit of a run and have some good wins. And there's a semi-final moment there where I was able to get a couple of tries against the Raiders, and these sort of moments really set me up for the rest of my career. So at the end of the Panthers season, this is in 2010, I'd struggled a lot with injuries in terms of my shoulders in particular, and I didn't really ever dislocate my shoulders, but I had what are called subluxes, so sort of mini dislocations, and I would be having these at this point nearly every week, and my shoulders were so sore, but you do recover from them, so I was able to play, and I was able to try and move on and get through things. But with that, I got to the end of the year, and I had to have the MRI scans on my shoulders, and they came back and I had these labrum tears. I think they were 13 millimeters long. I could be wrong, but 13 millimeters long. And I was faced with the fact that, I'm going to have 2 shoulder reconstructions. And I could not believe it. And I wasn't willing to accept that at the time I was going to have to go through that, because I was off contract the next year. And I was thinking, look, I'll rehab these injuries and I'll come out next year, play 3 or 4 good games, and hopefully I'll be able to sign a good deal. And then if I am faced with the fact that, hey, I can't even play footy, I need to get this done, then so be it. So I decided to make that decision along with the doctor's discretion, but that was the decision I make. And, rehabbing those injuries isn't something that's so uncommon, but it was probably, in hindsight, the wrong decision. But I'd have a good preseason. I'd come out early on in those games, and it was clear that I was going to struggle. About 2 to 3 games in, it got to the point where unless you ran straight at me, I couldn't even tackle you, and I couldn't fend, I couldn't push away. And after being in and out of first grade for, say, the first 10 to 12 rounds, I was like, this is my reality. I'm just going to have to face it. And I'd have to have a double shoulder reconstruction. So it was about, I think June. June, I'd have my first one. And what happens is I go in, I have the first shoulder reconstruction. I'm in the brace for about 6 weeks, have 2 weeks off, and then I come back and do the other one. So look, if I'm honest, back then, injuries didn't have a huge weight or effect on me. I'd had a lot, don't get me wrong, and even in between those reconstructions, I had a broken jaw, I had syndesmosis injuries on my ankle, had all sorts of stuff, but I never thought that this was going to be the thing that was going to bring me down. I just seen it as another thing that I'm going to have to get over, another adversity or struggle that I'll just have to overcome. And it's probably pretty obvious that I'd built a lot of resilience, knowing that I've been through this stuff before, I can overcome it, and something good can come from it on the other end, because already at this point, I've gone through that roller coaster that I speak about, that I've had some great moments followed by some of my lowest, but getting through them, making a choice and overcoming those adversities, something great has followed it. So I guess in my mind, I figured, hey, this is just going to be another one of those, but it was a really tough time. I was sort of a bigger player for that age at 19, 20, and as you can recall, I spent a lot of time in the gym in my earlier years, but you have 2 shoulder reconstructions at that age, and mate, it absolutely tears apart your body. I looked like a 12-year-old boy by the end of it, and it was a real struggle. And around that time, this is where I would meet Stephen Dank and go through that period in my life. Now, Stephen Dank, I was introduced to him during my surgery period, and what happens is basically when you're in that injury status or you're in your rehabilitation, you spend a lot of time on your own in the gym because you're not on the same schedule or routine as the NRL players, because they're training for games, doing weights around their schedule, etc. So I'd come in and I'd generally try to get most of my gym work done or my physio, and my timing would be a little bit dictated by myself. With the intro to Stephen Dank, he was involved with the club on a basis of he was assisting with our sports science and strength and conditioning department. And he was also currently, we knew him to be working at Manly, Gold Coast Suns, and the Sharks before that. So he'd come in and have an influence on all those sort of things. And I was introduced to him by Carl Jennings and Matt Ryan, who were in the sports science team at the Panthers. And, unfortunately, by the end of this saga, as much as I've had to deal with things, those guys had to as well. And it's just an unfortunate part of the story that anyone associated with Stephen Dank or any of these peptides involvements sort of had an impact on their career. So yeah, it's a tough thing for everyone to have to go through, including the club, myself, and those guys. But that's how I was introduced to Stephen Dank, and they were basically saying that, look, I think he can help you out. He's working with programs at other clubs, and as I said, he had that reputation built off the clubs like Manly and the Sharks that he was currently working at in the Rugby League. And the first time I met him, we'd have a discussion. It was out at the stadium, and I'd finished a weight session, and we had a discussion. And he'd look through my blood test, which he'd conducted for the whole team. I'd bring my scans in. He'd have a look at my injuries, and just gave me a general insight into some of the treatments that could potentially help me. about 3 to 4 days later, I came back in and we had another meeting, and he'd discuss his work with me about the things he was doing at other rugby league teams or the things he'd done in the past and the success he'd had. And he explained to me that my injury time we could potentially reduce by 3 months. Now, that was obviously something that was quite intriguing to me because my understanding was that if he'd had this success at other clubs, then that's something I'm definitely going to be interested in. And we'd sit there again in front of a whiteboard, and he'd discuss with me peptides and amino acid proteins and drawing molecules on a board. And at the time, you have to remember, and I think there was a key question I was asked in interviews around the time of my suspension. When you heard the word peptides, didn't this raise red flags? Well, no, it didn't, because in 2011, no one knew what a peptide was, and it certainly didn't ring alarm bells with me. And there's no doubt in my mind, absolutely, that I was assured that they were not banned substances. Stephen Dank was employed by other clubs, so I had no reason to think that, well, how could he be doing this in other places and coming here and I'd be all of a sudden doing something wrong? And it was guaranteed to me that they were not illegal. Everything was above board with WADA, and those assurances were given. So for me, it was there were no red flags or really things that I should be concerned about at that time to really think, hey, this Stephen Dank guy, he's crazy, he's doing something untoward, and I'm essentially getting involved with something that's illegal and banned substances. So there was absolutely none of that. And that would lay the platform for me then sort of undergoing these procedures. And what would happen is he described to me that what we were going to do is we were going to go to an off-site doctor at I think it was an injury care clinic. It was a public clinic. And again, one of the naive questions that I was asked later at a later date was, didn't you think it was strange that you didn't want to go through your club doctor? And this is one of those moments where I probably am guilty of being naive, if I'm guilty of anything. And he explained it that club doctors were quite apprehensive. And if I'm completely honest, unless it's absolutely ticked off in their mind, and it's not your norm or the basic stuff a doctor would prescribe or go through, then to be fair, they are quite apprehensive. So that did, at that time, it did strike a chord with me, and I thought, yeah, well, okay, it's a fair point. But keep in mind, I was still going to a completely legitimate clinic. There were patients, public, that all the clinic catered to was injuries and injury management. I went to a doctor at the time, and he would give me the same explanations, the same reassurances about the substances I was taking. So it's not as if I was going to see Stephen Dank in the back of a shed. All the reputable checkpoints that I needed, I thought that were there. And I'd basically go through this over a period of about 3 months, using CJC 1295 and thymosin. And I don't really think it had a massive effect, to be honest. I definitely didn't accelerate my recovery time. And the suspension that I received, which has in relation to trafficking, basically relates to picking up and transporting those peptides from clinic to clinic at a pure convenience. And the text messages that were involved was how I was eventually implicated. So, for me, it's a bit of a tough one, going through that period in my life, not really understanding how much of an effect it was going to have in the future, because this wouldn't all come to light and in the public domain until 2013. But look, if anything can come from that, my key takeaway is that I've always been a really strong believer. Stephen Dank, as a support staff, has no jurisdiction under ASADA, so it only relates to players, which is, in my mind, pretty disappointing, because I think if someone has the power and influence to come into a club and basically run these sort of supplement programs and not be held accountable, I just can't fathom that. So, look, I think at the end of the day, I'm a victim of someone that abused their power and trust in that position, and it's pretty disappointing, the whole thing. But at no point did I know or think or believe that I was undertaking anything illegal or taking any banned substances. And, even the consequent tests I'd had after that, whether it be blood tests or anything by ASADA, nothing had showed up. So there was absolutely no reason for me to believe that I had engaged in anything that was illegal. And it was, as I said, it was unfortunate that it wouldn't, until 2013, I wouldn't be made aware of all these things, but we'll get to that. The next phase of my life, which involved my rugby league career, I came back from the shoulder reconstructions in January, and I was pretty much a shell of myself. I wasn't the same player. Obviously being a lot smaller, the size, the confidence had taken a huge hit, but nonetheless, I was there to impress. We had a new coach, Ivan Cleary, who still had relative belief in me. I had a pretty good perception around the club that I was still a young guy with plenty of potential, and Ivan, he wasn't willing to take a backward step on that. There was some element of belief, and in parts, I had a pretty good preseason, but as those games started, it was confidence that was the real key issue for me, and whether it was running the ball, the contact, everything, I seemed to be, I'd need a little bit of time to get that stuff back. So first impressions last, and I believe I wasn't really able to make that for Ivan, and that would have effect on my career. I wouldn't get an opportunity to start the year in the NRL, and I'd be in and out of first grade, and things weren't really going well. Once I'd lost that belief, and not only in myself, but from the coaches at the Panthers, it's a bit of a slippery slope, and it's kind of all downhill from there. One that I've sort of experienced before, but that was the key highlight for me. And coming out of that, it's really hard to develop yourself week in, week out, and try and get yourself into a position where you genuinely can be perceived as a first grader. And it was a very, very timely call. We were at a Wollongong camp, outside of Sydney, and we were just going through a normal camp mid-season, trying to, I guess, tap into what's gone good, what's gone wrong, and it's something that's pretty common for a lot of NRL teams. And we were there, and I was pretty down in the dumps, and just by chance I'd get a call from a former Roosters teammate who was now at the Raiders, and he called me up and said, "Mate, what are you doing? I've noticed you're not playing in first grade. Are you looking for opportunities?" And I said, "Well, yeah, mate, I'm all ears. Like, of course I am." And he said, Fernsey, David Ferner, the Canberra Raiders coach, he'd be keen to have you over. And I said, "Mate, no way, you're kidding. Oh, I'm in. What do I need to do?" And anyway, he said he'll get Dave to give me a call. And of course, a couple of hours later, Dave gave me a call, and he said, basically, still believe you got a lot to prove, a lot of potential, and we'd love to have you at the club. We're a bit down on outside backs at the moment, and think you'd fit in well and be a good addition to our team. And mate, for me, it was music to my ears. I couldn't believe it, and I was over the moon. And for him, even for him to just show that little bit of belief in me, I think really sparked something for me. And before you knew it, a couple of weeks later, to the credit to the Panthers, they granted me a release, and Phil Gould at the time let me go. And I was pretty grateful because he gave me that contract when I was injured, but I think he understood that if I was going to get another opportunity or a chance, it wasn't going to be at the Panthers, and it was going to be at the Raiders. So he let me go, and I'd go over before the June 30 deadline. I remember getting to Canberra. It was a bit of a culture shock. It was definitely different coming from Sydney. I'd get there, I'd stay in a little motel in the city there and go to training, and I think it was there on the Tuesday or the Wednesday. And I'd get there, meet Fernsey and the team, and it was a good young group of players, so sort of had a pretty warm welcome. I was not only was I happy to be there, but the boys were really welcoming, and the whole club and staff, it was a good reflection of them. And Fernsey pulled me aside and said, "Mate, I'm thinking about probably playing you this week against St. George." I don't know if it was the Saturday or the Sunday, and I was like, "Oh my God, that's crazy." And there were definitely a couple of guys there at the time who were younger outside backs who were this was their opportunity, and I'd sort of come in and was going to take that. But that's footy. It's happened to me, and it's something that's pretty common. And by the end of that week, I'd debut with the Canberra Raiders, and it was amazing. When I got there, the team was in 13th position, and had a really good game. And for me, it was that little bit of enjoyment of football. I didn't have any pressure, but the feeling of going to a new club, and I often say this to a lot of other players, when they get faced with those new opportunities or change in general. Change is a pretty daunting thing, but it can offer so much. And change for me was the chance to change the perception. So I was going there with a point to prove, an opportunity to say, this is the type of player I am, this is who I am, to a whole new group of players and staff. And that alone has a massive effect. And then also that faith and belief that was shown to me by the players and coaching staff. I guess that excitement, that enjoyment, that motivation was back in huge amounts, and that really showed in my first game, and I was just eager and hungry to be there and prove a point. And we'd go on to have an amazing run. I'd strike up a centre wing partnership with Blake Ferguson, which was amazing at the time. And it's exactly what I just spoke about. You could see it on the field. We were smiling, high-fiving, have a good time, scoring tries. And that's exactly what we did. I think we went on to score about 30 tries in 15 games. So it was a great run, and we'd make it all the way to the semi-finals that year and unfortunately be knocked out. But I was given a new contract and seemed to be on top of the world. I just completely turned my rugby league career around, was playing some of my best footy I'd ever played. I was cemented a contract and a position at the Raiders, and I had some great mates and was just enjoying my football. Fast forward to January, February in 2013, and this is the beginning of the darkest day in sport. And this would come about through the media. There's a bit of politics involved, which I've had some information on that now, and it's pretty interesting how it all went down. But nonetheless, it was Australia's biggest saga, and basically the way it was described was there was bikie affiliations, there was prescription drugs, there was banned substances, and it was a huge issue, and it infiltrated our game. And I was thinking, oh, geez, this is full on, and it was all over the media, TV, newspaper. The next thing that followed was Stephen Dank's name mentioned, and I seen the picture and I instantly thought, oh no, what's going on here? Like, I knew I had that affiliation with him based on the work I'd done with him at Penrith, so I thought, this is crazy. What am I going to do? And it's hard to recollect exactly what happened in that time, but I remember knowing that, well, I've got to talk to someone because I could be involved here. And then rang my manager, George Mimas, and my mum, and sort of spoke to them. And really, they're the only people I could confide in, because not only did you, at the time, you don't want to identify with all this stuff. So you don't want to try and say, yeah, I'm involved, or you from what you're hearing, you genuinely believe that, oh, hey, I'm not involved in this. I wasn't doing anything wrong. So this could be something that's completely left field, not to do with me. But it would sort of become quite obvious that it was involving peptides. It was involving the clubs he was at. Around that time, there were no players' names. There were no teams named. There was nothing really specific, but you would sort of try to, I guess, join the dots and understand that, look, I could be implicated in this. And it was a really tough time because, as I said, to try and manage all of this and know that nothing like this had ever gone on in Australia before. So no one really knew what to do. No one knew how to handle it. No one understood what the next steps were. So for me, I basically was only able to have conversations with my manager and my mum and try and get through this as best as I could. And with the Raiders, it was a really tough time because we'd start playing trials and games and going to training and having this weight, carrying around this weight and having this cloud over your head, knowing how serious it could be it was so hard, honestly. Like, it was probably the hardest thing I've had to deal with. I'm a pretty, I guess, open person. I've got a pretty big personality, and when I go to training and the laughing stops, or you're just not as focused, or the energy's not there, you start to get questioned, what's wrong, all these sort of things. And for me to have to keep that to myself or try and manage it just purely on my own was one of the hardest things I've had to do. And just showing up to training and performing and going to games, and everyone's a great judge from the sidelines, but the reality is, and I think it's a really good, important message, is that there's so much more to any professional athlete, but we'll talk about myself in this circumstance, a rugby league player, than just the 80 minutes you see on the field or the little snippet you get to see at training or in an interview. Remembering they have a life, there could be multiple other things going on, whether it's their relationships, their health, whatever it is. And I guess it's just an important reminder to think about that the next time we think a player's having an off day or an off game, and there could be a little bit more to it. And it's not just about performing when you get into that 80 minutes. And for me, that scrutiny was really tough to go through, knowing that, geez, I'm not my normal self and I'm not able to do the things that I normally can do. And having to manage that throughout the whole season was really tough. And as it became more and more evident and the media were able to get hold of more and more things, my name would then be tossed up, and as well as the Canberra Raiders, and it would be clear that I was involved. So the scrutiny and the pressure and the media grew and grew and grew over the season, and we'd get to the end of the year. wasn't a great year. And I'd have my ASADA meetings toward the end of the year, and we basically sat down in a room. It was similar to this, and it was over 4 days, so it was pretty full on. But the way it was laid out to me was it all came about through text messages. So all the evidence presented was through text messages obtained by Stephen Dank's phone, and they were displayed to me of the accusations, what they believe I'd done, what they believed I was involved in, and what information I could offer. Going through this time, it was definitely tough because, again, I wanted to distance myself from any of this stuff because I believed I hadn't done anything wrong. I didn't think I'd been involved in any banned substances or illegal activity. So my first thought or apprehensions over those first 2 days of the interview was to say, hey, I'm not involved in this, and really understand all the facts. Once I did understand that and what it all meant, for me, I decided that the best option, based on some guarantees from ASADA in way of compensations and lower suspension times, although I didn't believe that I was facing anything more than, to be honest, 1 to 2 years, I decided that the best thing for me to do was I wanted to end this, and I wanted to be honest. Now, honest in the way of the fact that the way ASADA works is you are responsible for what goes into your body. Now, you can argue right or wrong, but in hindsight, I get the fact that they have a very black and white role to play, and you can't show discretion to everyone's different individual matters. For me, as disappointing as it was understandable and pretty clear that I'd have to accept the facts that under their definitions and guidelines, I had taken a banned substance, although I'd gone through some pretty key moments in terms of I checked with the ASADA website what I was taking. I'd been tested. It was really hard to get my head around, but that's what I was faced with. So I wanted to be really raw and honest. I wasn't able to offer any information about other players, which would have had a huge impact on those discounts to my suspension time. My thoughts around that was that I couldn't offer them information that was based on hearsay. Now, if we look back at everything I was told from Stephen Dank, if everything was true, then I wouldn't have been in that position. So the things he told me about other players, I wasn't willing to share because in my mind of belief, that was hearsay. Did I see it? No. So could I really comment and say that that was the truth? No. And I really wasn't willing to go down that path. I wanted to focus on myself and what I was involved in. What I was willing to do was give information on Stephen Dank because, as I said earlier, I believe he was the person at fault and he had to answer for something. I was told and given the understandings that that would allow me to have those discounts and compensations in my suspension, which later on I'd find out was unfortunately not true. And that's one of the things that is probably disappointing, that those support players can't be held accountable by ASADA, which I think is something which could definitely be reviewed. But anyway, I went through that process, took them through the whole story, the whole path, came out of that really relieved. That period I went throughout the season with the Canberra Raiders had such a huge effect on me, to the point where, I remember breaking down in front of teammates towards the end there after a Bulldogs game, and it was just a really low point. And I think I walked away from that ASADA interview knowing what I was going to face, and it was something that was going to be pretty horrendous, but it was a relief. It was just that weight off the shoulders, and I thought I can finally move on. Not move on to what I really wanted, but at least I had an opportunity to leave this all behind me, and that weight of expectation was gone. And one of the disappointing things around that, I went straight back to Canberra, and I was assured by ASADA and the NRL that it wouldn't be released to the media for, I think it was a 2-week period. So to give me a good opportunity, because the process I had to go through for it to become registered publicly, they had to do that in ASADA. And I was understanding that it gave me a good opportunity to tell my parents, my family, the club, and do everything the right way. And as I got back to Canberra in the afternoon, I'd get back to the club, and it was all over the TV. So the NRL had run a press conference, and yeah, wow, it was, again, one of the most disappointing things I had to go through in that period. And coming back to see all the staff and just their shock, and it was just so much embarrassment, and having to face that in front of everyone was really, really tough. And I guess that triggered me to just want to get out of there, and that's pretty much what I did. And I think the next day I came home, and There were media everywhere, and I just thought, I've got to get out of here. It's going to be the best thing for me. And I'd previously been to Thailand on a little bit of a trip in the off-season with Rennie Matura, Willie Tonga, a few other guys, and you just go over there to train, have a good time. You're on the beach. It's a cheap holiday. There's this place in Phuket, Geelong, where it's basically gyms, healthy food, and as I said, you can train, get away, and no one really cares about rugby league or anything that's going on back home. And that's where I wanted to go. I'd get straight out of there. And I remember being in Sydney Airport, and I was so paranoid. I felt like everyone was looking at me. And I got on the plane and had my hoodie on, and the bloke sat next to me, and he had the double-page Telegraph spread, and it was Sandor Earl, the drug dealer, and he was sitting right next to me. I was like, oh, this is great. It was so, I didn't know if he was looking at me or not, but it was definitely embarrassing. And I'd get off there, and once I landed in Thailand, it was a place of where I could just have some peace and I guess get away from everything that was going on back home, but also get back into somewhat of a routine and just enjoy myself. You're at the beach, you're surrounded by good people, and it was a really good experience. And I'd come back later on that year to do a TV interview with Channel 9, which had a really good impact for me. It basically allowed me to humanise everything in my story and give other people in the public domain a perspective that wasn't just driven by the media, and that really helped. But my time in Thailand was amazing, to be honest. I just got on with life, and I remember being in a hotel. I was sitting there, and there was a few other guys from Oz there, and I'd always been someone who had visions of doing something outside of football. So I wasn't always thinking about, hey, I'm just going to be a rugby league player till my 30s and I'll just pack it in. I was always thinking about what can I be involved in. Had a bit of a spark for business, and although I didn't have too much experience or education around it, I knew that I wanted to be involved in something, even whether that was leveraging off my platform and profile as an NRL player. But I had this idea and a little bit of involvement with some guys back in Oz about opening a cafe. And I got there, and just by chance, about 2 weeks in, there was a open space for lease. It was about 60, 70 square meters. And I told this guy that was staying there at the hotel, and I said, mate, I reckon we should do this. I've got this idea. And it sort of transformed a little bit differently to the way I had in the first place. It morphed into something a little bit different, but we said, let's go for it. And to open a cafe in Thailand, it's a little bit different to back home. Not as much red tape, and definitely doesn't cost as much. So I think for 30 grand, we were able to do a refurb and get all the signage and get all the contracts in place that we needed. And we were off and running, and it was called Muscle Bar. So pretty cliche name, but it did the job, and it did so much for me. What it offered the demographic at the time was some Western food, which not that could be trusted, but was owned by Australians, and just that healthy food that wasn't quite there. And that concept seemed to work quite well. And for me, what it gave me was, it gave me a purpose. It gave me routine. It gave me everything that football had, but that I didn't have in this setting. And that competition, I wanted it to really succeed, and I went all in. Before you knew it, I was working 12-hour days. I was making smoothies. I was going and doing grocery runs, getting involved in customer service, and I really hung my hat on just giving a shit when I talk to people, making sure that when a customer came in, I was having genuine conversations. I cared about what they wanted, and always making sure they had a good experience. And that seemed to be the building blocks for anything I've been involved in, really. As a bit of a tip, I think if you can really focus on that stuff, the customer experience before anything else, you're always going to be pretty good. I'd go on in my time in Thailand over a 3-year period to open 2 cafes and a gym across the road called Primal Fitness. I was a founding trainer at Unit 27, which was a really good strength and conditioning gym that I had a great time in, building that up and being involved, meeting lots of different people. And that's another thing Thailand gave me, it was my first real major travel experience, but I just met so many different people. Playing in rugby league, it is a bit of a bubble. Those are the people you hang around, your teammates, the staff members, people who talk about rugby league. So when I went over to Thailand, meeting people from all walks of life, from all over the world, it just opens up your perspective a little bit, and just having conversations, as I said, with people that you would never hang around with, just because they're not from where you're from, but just what you thought were not your type of people. But you just end up having some great conversations, and you learn a lot about yourself and other people and their experiences. And it was a great port of travel, Thailand. I was able to go Europe, America, South Africa, around Asia, a lot easier to travel than being in Australia. And It was just a really good experience. The whole thing, it offered me so much. And some people said that me escaping that limelight in Australia sort of let everything off the hook and maybe wasn't a good move. Out of sight, out of mind, I guess is a better way to describe it. But for me, I think personally, me walking away, developing myself, maturing, and getting involved in all that stuff without all the scrutiny was definitely the best option for me personally. And it's something that I've spoken about at length with people. But although it was a really frustrating time and everything I went through, especially, coming into that suspension, I'd have my hearing probably 18 months in after being knocked back for those discounts that I spoke about on my suspension, which was disappointing. I'd go there to the tribunal with no result, made a few mistakes with probably the way I went about it in terms of my counselling legally and the battle I was trying to go through. All in hindsight, mind you, but yeah, disappointing to receive that 4 years was something that I never expected or thought would happen, and it was a tough pill to swallow, to be honest, because, mate, 4 years at the end of the day, it's a long time, it's a long chunk out of your career, and it's a big life change. But never at one point did I think, no, I'm not going to come back and play rugby league. I was always determined to do that. The fact that I had that tribunal probably 18 months into it probably helped because I'd already knocked off a fair bit of time. Still hard to overcome that fact that it would be so long. Couldn't watch the footy, couldn't have too much thoughts about it because it was so far away, but never lost that drive and hunger to make sure I wanted to come back. And I guess in hindsight, it would be hard to take everything that happened to me back because those experiences that I just explained, they really shaped me for the person I am today. And going through all those things, whether it be in business, meeting people, traveling, experiencing new things, there's just no way I could take it back. So as unfortunate as it was, it shaped me for who I am today, and I'm really proud of the person that is sitting here with the opportunities I've got. So eventually I'd sell up all of my business ventures in Thailand. That would give me a little bit of savings in the bank to chase a new venture. And although I'd been involved with gyms in Thailand and thought I could probably do it myself, F45 is a functional training gym, little boutique studio, class-based, that I'd heard about that I thought, no, I can do this myself. Like I'm not gonna get involved with a franchise. But by the stage that I was ready to move back around 2016, it had absolutely blown up. And if you put the sign up, people had come. That's how good it had gotten. So I thought I'm going to get involved with this F45, but with the understanding that I wanted to try and get a gig with the Melbourne Storm, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So I looked into what my options were, and if I'm honest, back then, Sydney would have been a better fit because I know the area. I have an understanding of the demographic, the people that are there, where it would fit. I still have a bit of profile there, whether it was negative or positive. But Melbourne, Sydney was sort of done, and I had a look at Melbourne, and for me, the big one was the city. So the city was split into a couple of territories, and I had a look, and everything was vacant. I couldn't believe it, and I thought F45 would be perfect for the city. Time-poor corporates who are looking to get involved in some team training that, as a training method, I think F45 is right up there, and it ticks a lot of boxes, especially for the demographic of the CBD. And to see all of those were free, I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. It was pretty shocking. And 2 weeks later, I'd find a real estate agent who shared the same vision as me and was able to spot a basement level space that could have the potential to be an F45, so credit to him. And a couple of weeks later, I had the conversation with my manager. I said, I'm not looking to really try and sign with any other teams. I'd love to try and get a gig with the Melbourne Storm, and I'm going to take on this F45 in Melbourne. Before you knew it, in 2016, I'd signed the lease papers. Now, it wouldn't be all smooth sailing. I'd go through some headaches and a massive learning curve. As I said, getting involved with business in Thailand was far different to getting involved in Australia. There's a lot of things you have to tick off, and going through the council approvals, which take months and months, and then learning about the building was another one. And I generally think I get quite frustrated when I'm involved in something I don't know. So even going through the stuff with the builders and all the things with the council, it was really frustrating because I had no idea, and I made plenty of mistakes, wasted a lot of money, but eventually it's the only way I learnt, and I've learnt a lot since then. But with the Melbourne Storm stuff, I had this vision and belief and conversation with my manager, and I said, look, if I've got an opportunity to see how good I can be one last time, then Melbourne's the place I want to do it. And I pretty much put all my eggs in one basket at that point. I'd moved to Melbourne. I was deep in negotiations and building and everything else for the gym. So we're probably 4 or 5 months from opening, and was getting closer towards the end of 2016, and it was during preseason. I think at the start of December, I obviously wanted to wait till then, until everything was died down and I'd actually have the opportunity to chat with the club. And I sat down and I penned a letter to Craig Bellamy. So I wrote this letter, and I'd previously read his book purposely on a flight to Thailand, and I just thought, how am I going to get in contact with the Storm? I didn't want to go through my manager and take the normal route. I wanted to be able to have a really open, honest conversation and give him a really good understanding into who I am as a person and what my intentions were. So I wrote this letter, told him who I was, everything I'd been through, again, really honest, and just said, look, this is what I believe I can bring to the club. And, it was pretty confident, but that confidence had been built on the back of some really strong intentions, and I was really hungry to not only prove a point, but to get back, and I wanted to finish on my terms, and I believe I still had a lot to give. And to Craig's credit, a couple of days later, he called me up and he said, mate, do you want to, let's meet. We'll meet at a cafe. And I met with him at a cafe a couple of days later, and it was amazing. We sat down and we spoke about, he sort of just wanted to see whether I was genuine, whether I really did have that motivation to come back, because he knew it wasn't going to be an easy road. And I guess he just wanted to see if I was in good nick and how keen I was. And we'd have that little conversation. And by the end of it, shockingly, he said to me, mate, I've had a chat to the right people, to the powers that be at the Storm, and I'm in. I'm keen to give you another chance, and we'd love to have you a part of the club. And I just couldn't believe it. It was a huge moment for me. And the fact that he was willing to show that faith and belief in me, like I touched on with the Raiders, it was just massive. And that's really what I needed. I wanted someone. I don't think I would have been able to embark on this journey on my own, and I needed to be motivated for the year of 2017, to train by myself, to turn up, to get ready for what would be one of the biggest moments in my life, getting that chance at the Storm. I just needed that moment with Craig, and in hindsight, him to just give me that reassurance and that belief, and it really laid the platform for 2017. And I'd go on to have some other conversations with people at the club, and in fairness, the timeline I envisioned was something completely different to that. But to have those assurances from Craig, and to know that I was going to be a part of the Storm was huge. And in 2017, we opened a gym in, I think, February and March, and to juggle opening a new business, I was coaching in there, taking every class, fully involved, and then training twice a day. I'd go and run up at Albert Park in the morning, and then I'd go to the gym at the afternoon at WSSC, Woodford Sports Science, with Christian Woodford, and I'd do that every day. So you can imagine, you can't just do that if you don't have a pretty profound motivation, and that was given to me by Craig, Frank Panisi at the club, and the Melbourne Storm. And that opportunity that I had that was coming up towards the end of 2017, that was my big driver, my big motivation. And myself and my partner at the time, myself and my partner Steph, it was tough going through that new period, opening the gym and opening F45 and trying to juggle everything. We just moved to Melbourne. My partner's from England, so it was another bit of a culture shock for her. But we still had that little bit of knowledge from what we'd done in Thailand. We met in Thailand, and she was heavily involved in everything there, and played a big part in supporting everything. So we'd go on, we'd get through 2017, and I think July, August would come. And that was my moment that the suspension had ended, and it would eventually be made public that I was going to get that chance with the Melbourne Storm. So it was a pretty special time as well. You got to think 4 years. In reflection, it goes so quick, but it's such a long time. And to finally reach that point where that suspension date was over and be able to say, yes, I'm going to be a part of the Melbourne Storm was great. And getting ready for that 2017 preseason, I started to meet some amazing people at the club who'd go on to have a huge impact. And even guys like Lachlan Penfold, who's our sports science, he coordinates everything to do with our training here. And he would catch up with me at Albert Park once a week, and during the Storm finals, and we'd go through some running and speed sessions. And for anyone who knows old Lockie Penfold, he's a great bloke, very smart, but when he comes to work, he works hard. When he leaves, he's done. And for the fact that he would rock up in his 1940s red ute and show me the time of day to help me out with my coaching, again, just another example of the sort of people that are involved in this organisation. And you can imagine how great I felt knowing that those people had my back and were willing to offer their time to help me improve. So I'd rock up to pre-season, and 2017 was the big one for me because I had done so much just to prepare and rock up in good nick for that pre-season in 2017. I'd put so much time and effort in, and I did. To be honest, the reality of the situation is I rocked up and I was strong, I was fast, I was fit, I was just ready. I'd done everything I possibly could for that moment, and the first couple of weeks really reflected that. And everyone could see that, but there was also that really big motivation. I felt like a kid when I came back to the Storm. It was almost like, I'd never been a part of anything before, and I was running around just so genuinely excited to be there. And the Storm, it's pretty public. You go through the work program where you work every day, labouring and train early morning and late afternoon for the first couple of weeks, which was tough. But as I said, I think there was just that huge amount of gratitude because I knew what it was like to have all of this taken away from you. And I don't think you can really, it wouldn't matter what person you get in to speak or what ex-player tells the boys about how lucky they are. Well, I don't like the word lucky, but how I guess, how grateful they should be for the opportunity to be involved in rugby league and have that as their full-time job. But unless you really have it taken away from you and experience the other side, I think it's pretty hard to come to that realization. But that's something I had, and it really drove me throughout that time. Week 3 of the preseason, and I'll never forget it. We were out at one of the alternative training parks, and we just finished a wrestling session, and it was coming right to the end of the session, and the play we're genuinely practicing ruck plays at that time, and the play went left, come back right, and we were so focused on sort of coming back at inside shoulders at the time. I remember early on in the preseason, it was one of the things they were trying to drill into us. We had a lot of new players in a new group, and I cut back hard off my right, and it all fell into place. Bit of an overstride, bit of a jump, and my knee buckled, and it was a pretty full-on pain. Never did I think, I reckon for the next hour or two, I was like, there's no way I've done my ACL. It's the one thing you do not want to do. And I thought, it's just no way. How could life be that cruel that the timing of all this, I could tear my ACL. Anyway, we'd go back to the club, and they weren't too sure. I had my scans, and the doc rang me. I was in the physio rooms back there, and the doc rang me and said I'd torn my ACL, and it was such a tough time. It was such a mix of emotions. I was embarrassed. I had so much regret. I was so sorry. I just felt bad that I was sitting in a room of guys, and there was the welfare officers, the physios. Frank Panisi was there, and I was sitting in a room of people they've given me this opportunity, and I felt like I'd let them down. Now, people will say that's a stupid thing to have, but those are the emotions I had at the time because I was so keen to give back. They'd given me this opportunity, and they'd given me this chance, and I really wanted to give back to them, and I felt like I'd just ruined that, and there's so many things going through my head, and I shed a lot of tears in that moment. The first call I got was from Craig. I was still sitting in the room, and just a really strong reflection of the type of person he is, and the reason I have such a good relationship with him today. And he called me and said, mate, if you want to do this, if you want to go round again next year, it's done. We're more than happy, so don't worry about it. And that's probably the key thing I remember from that conversation. I remember hearing that, and although it didn't take away what I was going through at the time, it was so massive for me to hear that and know that, because in reality, that's one of the biggest things that was going through my mind. Like, what am I going to do? I'm done here. It's all over. But to hear that, you want to think about what could inspire me through my rehab. That's a pretty big one. So over the next few days, I remember waking up in mornings you just wake up, you think, oh, yep, sweet. And then it takes about 5-10 seconds and you realize, oh, no, I've got a torn ACL here. And it was just having to go through the emotions that day in, day out. And if I could give some advice around that, I would say don't shy away from those emotions. It's really important. The last thing you want to do is go through something as significant as that and try and bottle everything up and feel like you have to hide things or show how manly you are or whatever it is and not go through that wave. So I think for me, it was important to acknowledge, yeah, it does suck and it is upsetting and it is painful, and go through that for the first week. But on the other side of that, my advice would also be is you need to move on. You need to accept your reality, and you're faced with those choices that I speak of. It's a black and white choice. Am I going to let this own me, control my emotions and thoughts, take me into a depression and, hold me back from what's potentially ahead of me? Or am I going to accept that, yep, this is where I'm at, this is what's happened, what's next? What's my next goal? What's my next target? How can I make the best out of a shitty situation? Now, if I was to offer you those choices, it's easy to say which one you're going to take, but unfortunately it's not that easy when you actually have to go through something. But it's really important that you go through that phase where you just have to accept what the reality is and accept how can I move on from this and what's next in store for me. And for me, that was I had a really good surgeon, Julian Feller. I'd get a quad tendon graft, which is something a little bit different at the time, and it still is not really your norm. But the way it was explained to me, I was really happy with the explanation. It's a big, thick graft, and I was really confident in the surgeon. He's a great guy, great personality, and he's got a great reputation. And I'm really grateful for the experience I had with my surgery for Julian. And I finished the surgery, and it was that mentality that I spoke about. It was what's next? What can I do? So if he said to me, focus on getting your legs straight, focus on getting your swelling down. My whole life was committed to that. Complete tunnel vision, that's all I was focused on. Next goal, walking, getting your quad firing, getting the swelling down, boom, that was the next thing I'd go on. So I'd go on to create these mini goals and targets that would give me so much drive that I'd be able to break things down into 1 week, 2 week, a month blocks. And on the back of some great assistance from the physios, the support staff, the rehab, our strength coach, our speed coach. But I was able to tie all that in and have those very clear pathways and goals of this is what I want to do and this is what I'm going to achieve. And that would be the next piece of advice that I would give. It's extremely important. Write this stuff down. Do what you need to do. Have a clear understanding of what are my short-term goals, what are my long-term goals, and where do I want to be. And having that why was a massive drive and motivator for me to get through that rehab. And getting through my rehab was really going to be a testament to I spoke about I felt like I'd lost the opportunity to repay the faith that was shown in me. Well, this was my chance. So my mindset was, and the thought process I had was that every day I rock up, if I can come in with a good attitude and a smile, that some of the other boys who aren't injured, who maybe are having an off day or going through something, can look to me and go, mate, he's far worse off than me. And he still comes in here, trains, rips in with a smile on his face. So I knew I could be an inspiration to my teammates and to the group. The second thing was, my way of saying thank you for the constant reassurance and assistance given to me every day by this club was to, train my ass off. So whether I was on the bike, I was in the gym, I was drilling out on the field, I was given 110% because I knew that was my way of showing my gratitude for all the time and effort they'd put into me. It would be a bit of a tough year, I guess. Coming back, I didn't really know what was in store. I came back at an unbelievable time, 6.5 months. And was able to get to a decent level of footy, but I'd cop a few other injuries, a little knock to my other knee and a couple of things on my foot, and really didn't give me a great platform to succeed. But I got pretty close to getting a start in the NRL, but just be back in the mix, in the system with the boys, and do everything I could to help them and assist them week to week. Watching the Storm go to the grand final was a great experience, but I'd sort of shifted my focus and knew that, hey, my biggest impact at this club is going to be 2019 and beyond, and I was setting myself up for the 2018-19 preseason. And coming into that preseason, I was very clear on what I wanted to achieve. I knew that at the Storm, coming here it was unbelievable. The environment was nothing like I'd ever experienced. The accountability, the structure, the team-first mentality that they had, again, it's just something that I've never been involved in. And the way the coaches are willing to give back, I couldn't believe it. whether it was the video reviews or the assistants they were willing to have, the conversations, again, it just creates this environment of you're willing to do so much for us, or we're willing to do just as much and give back to you. And that's how I felt day in, day out. So I knew that preseason I really wanted to improve and get better, and I guess prove a point and have a big impact in 2019. Going through the preseason was tough. It's by far the toughest preseason I've been through. That's not taking anything away from the other clubs I've been a part of, but we'd go on to do the well-publicised IDQ camp, which is the I Don't Quit camp in December, just before you break up. I think I lost 5 kilos, and it was a huge test of mental toughness. 3 days without sleep, and yeah, it's a pretty crazy experience. But you get back to the club, and all staff members, all players are there to greet you, and it's a bit of a rite of passage. So that was another great experience and a good box to tick. And I'm in this position now based off the back of that preseason where, although I still had to go through a few little struggles and niggles as you do, I really prepared well, and I felt like I was able to review and analyse myself, take a lot out of it, and improve as a player. Fast forward to now, and it's only a couple of weeks ago that I debuted for the club against the Cowboys, and we're lucky enough, the Sunshine Coast Falcons are playing really well, which is the reserve grade team that I play in. And for me, that's my opportunity to go back and sharpen my craft and try and improve and progress each week. And I've gotten to the point where if I am looking at my 2019 season, it is a little bit individual. I'm looking at myself going, I'm not putting any huge expectations about how many NRL games I play or where I want to be. I'm extremely grateful that I got a 2-year contract from the Storm, and that was in reality based off the back of a good attitude and being a really good trainer. So for me to have that has allowed me to basically take the pressure off and take a step back and just really focus on what I want to achieve, both team-wise and individually. And as I said, individually, for me, that's progressing each week. Coming to the realizations after the game and analysing and going, hey, I could be better at this, I could be better at that, fixing it week to week and just getting better. And that Cowboys game, it was a testament to all the hard work I'd put in before, and it was a way to cap all that off. And it was such an amazing moment. The club, Craig, Frank, and all the players made it a really special week for me. And it sort of went under the radar, but the people that were all involved, I was able to have some pretty cool moments with them and just reflect on everything that had happened for me to get to this point. And as I said, it was really special, and the game probably didn't go as well as I'd hoped. I imagined something a little bit different for 6 years. You can imagine the amazing tries and things that were going through my head, but I definitely wasn't too critical, and I looked at it as a way to cap off my journey and everything I've been through, and it was a reflection of all that hard work. So it was a really proud moment for me. And I stand here today going through everything I've been through, but trying to just improve each week and be as good a clubman, teammate, and player as I can individually. And I'm definitely not done. My time with the Storm is I'm forever improving, and I'm really hungry to get that next opportunity and make a huge impact for this club. And I guess we're nearing the end, and that's pretty much my journey in a nutshell. And things I wanted to highlight from all of that is going back to that roller coaster. If I can pass on one thing through my experiences, and I'm now 29 and able to have these realizations, but the highest highs and the highest lows, for some reason they follow each other. And I really put it down to those critical moments post any of those adversities where I've decided that I am going to control what happens after that, and it's not going to dictate how I feel, what happens to me, or the path I go on. So those moments where I'm able to take control, come to my reality, take a positive attitude and mindset and go, okay, let's do it. What's next? I really believe that the reward on the other end of that, and time again, it's proven me right, that something great will come from that. So I hope that my story and my journey can offer you those same realizations, and I hope my story is a story of lessons and motivation, but one that people can understand that go through that roller coaster, continue to overcome those things, because those adversities aren't negativities in your life. They're opportunities for growth. They're lessons. Take them head on, understand that, and use them to fuel you to be a better person and ultimately your success. And I hope that's what this does. I hope that what this podcast offers, and I'm really looking forward to the insights from other athletes' journeys, and I'm hoping you guys can take a lot away from it and continue to support me, Fueled by Fire. And as I said, get around the show, and we have some amazing athletes coming up, and I've got no doubt you're going to have a lot of takeaways from it. So thanks for listening, guys, and I will see you on the next episode. Make sure you subscribe, download, and share this podcast. Cheers. Talk to you soon.